On an ordinary school morning in Chicago, students buzzed with excitement about an upcoming 2-day hiking trip. For most of them, it was just another adventure filled with campfires, laughter, and stories under the stars. Before we continue, please take some time to subscribe to Dailydose, like, and share this video. But for 10-year-old Maggie Vasquez, who lived with cerebral palsy and relied on a wheelchair, the thought of joining her classmates at Camp Sullivan seemed almost impossible. The forest trails weren't built for wheels, and the rocky paths could barely be managed by the teachers themselves, let alone a wheelchair. Maggie's mother quietly wondered if this would be one of those many childhood moments her daughter would have to miss. But Maggie's teacher, Ms. Helma Wardenar, saw things differently. In her eyes, there was no question. Maggie had to be part of this trip, and that determination set off a chain of events that no one in the school or the wider community would ever forget. Ms. Helma wasn't a teacher who believed in leaving anyone behind. She had taught Maggie since first grade, had seen her laugh with her friends, and had witnessed the quiet way she sometimes sat on the sidelines, excluded not by choice but by circumstance. When she looked at the itinerary for Camp Sullivan, she felt her chest tighten. Maggie deserved the same adventures as the others, the same chance to hear the crunch of leaves underfoot and the rustle of deer in the woods. There was no question she needs to come with us, Helma said later. The only real question was how. At first, the brainstorming seemed almost comical. Could they rent a pony to carry Maggie along the horse paths? No rules wouldn't allow it. Could they bring a rugged stroller or a special wheelchair designed for trails? After searching, nothing fit Maggie's size or needs. At one point, Helma even entertained the thought of sneaking a horse in and simply paying the fine later. But she stopped herself. She couldn't teach her students the value of respect and then break the rules herself. So, she turned to something else entirely, her community. One night, scrolling through her phone, Helma wrote a Facebook post asking friends if they had any ideas. She didn't expect much, but a reply from Greg, an employee at Recreational Equipment Inc., REI, sparked hope. He didn't have a solution yet, but promised he would look. 2 weeks later, he called back with news that felt like a miracle. He had found a carrier called the Freeloader, designed for kids up to 80 pounds. It wasn't cheap over $300, but it was exactly what they needed. Helma didn't hesitate. With Maggie's permission and her parents' blessing, she bought the carrier and prepared herself for the physical challenge. She wasn't a professional athlete, and carrying a growing 10-year-old on her back for miles was no small feat. But this wasn't about convenience or comfort. It was about making sure Maggie was included. When the day of the trip arrived, excitement filled the air. About 50 students and 10 staff members gathered with their backpacks, sleeping bags, and snacks. Among them, Maggie beamed with anticipation. For once, she wasn't left behind, she was part of the group. Helma hoisted her onto her back using the freeloader, adjusted the straps, and took the first determined step onto the trail. Every pair of eyes watched in awe. The hike wasn't easy. The paths wound through uneven terrain, climbing and dipping, with tree roots stretching like ropes across the soil. There were moments Helma felt her legs ache and her shoulders burn, but each time she thought about stopping, Maggie's joy pushed her forward. The little girl sang softly, made jokes with her classmates walking alongside, and clapped whenever they spotted a frog, bird, or deer. Her laughter floated through the forest, a sound that made every painful step worth it. Other teachers offered to take turns carrying Maggie, but Helma rarely handed her off. She was one of us, she said later, describing how Maggie's presence changed the entire atmosphere of the trip. The students didn't just see her disability anymore, they saw her excitement, her courage, and her unshakable smile. That night, around the campfire, Maggie sat beside her classmates, roasting marshmallows and listening to scary stories. For the first time, she wasn't just an observer of these special moments, she was living them. The stars above glittered like a promise, and her classmates treated her as though the wheelchair had never existed. By the time they returned home, the bond between Maggie and her peers was stronger than ever, and the admiration for Miss Helma had grown beyond words. Photos of the trip, showing the teacher carrying her student through the forest, quickly spread online. The world saw what love and determination could do, and people everywhere were touched by the story. But for Helma, it wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about doing what any teacher, any human being, should do, making sure no child feels left behind. She later said, "When you have a child who is enjoying the moment and being with her peers, those are moments that I was able to push through. And in those moments, something far greater was carried than just a child. It was a lesson, a reminder that compassion can lift us all higher than we ever thought possible." For Maggie's mother, Michelle Vasquez, the impact of this trip went far beyond just 2 days in the woods. Watching her daughter come home with stories of frogs, campfires, and the silly jokes her classmates shared brought tears to her eyes. Because of her challenges, she doesn't get those opportunities, Michelle said. To be out in nature, to experience what her peers were experiencing, that was pretty amazing for her. She knew Maggie would carry those memories forever, but she also knew her daughter had gained something much more precious. The knowledge that she was not defined by her limitations, but rather by her spirit. For once, Maggie hadn't been the girl in the wheelchair. She was just Maggie, a 10-year-old adventurer who hiked with her class, sang songs on the trail, and told jokes by the fire. As the photos of Miss Helma carrying Maggie began to circulate online, they ignited something powerful. Parents, teachers, and strangers from all over the country left messages of admiration. Some wrote about their own children with disabilities and how this story gave them hope that there are teachers out there who truly see every child as worthy of inclusion. Others simply thanked Helma for reminding them that small acts of love can change the world. But for Helma, none of this was about recognition. She shrugged off the viral attention, insisting she only did what needed to be done. It wasn't about being a hero, she explained. It was about doing what's right. No child should feel left behind just because the world isn't designed for them. Her words carried a quiet truth, the kind that lingers long after the headlines fade. The ripple effect of that trip spread throughout the school as well. Other teachers began rethinking how they could better include students with disabilities in activities that once seemed too difficult. Administrators brainstormed more accessible field trips, and students became more aware of how to support one another. The lesson wasn't just for Maggie, it was for everyone. In the weeks that followed, Maggie often talked about Camp Sullivan with a glow in her eyes. She told her mother about the way the leaves crunched underfoot, the deer that startled them by the stream, and how her classmates had cheered when she reached the top of a hill on Helma's back. "I felt like I was flying," she said once with a grin. Those words alone made every step of Helma's journey worth it. Michelle often reflects on how different things could have been if Helma had simply accepted that Maggie couldn't go. It would have been easy, maybe even expected, for a teacher to say, "This trip isn't for you." But instead, Helma chose the harder path, literally carrying the weight of her students' world on her back. In doing so, she carried much more: the dignity of a child, the hopes of a family, and the belief that inclusion isn't just possible, it's essential. And so, a simple school trip became something much bigger. It became a story of compassion, resilience, and determination. It became a reminder that the strongest lessons we teach are not always found in textbooks, but in the way we treat each other when life presents a challenge. Today, Maggie's story lives on as a symbol of what happens when love overrules limitations and mistakes and one. Helma's example stands as proof that one person's willingness to go above and beyond can inspire countless others to do the same. As the sun set over Camp Sullivan that evening, Maggie and her classmates roasted marshmallows under the stars, their laughter echoing in the woods. To everyone else, it was just another camping trip. But to Maggie and Helma, it was something much more. It was proof that when kindness carries us, no path is ever too steep, and no dream is ever out of reach.